Hi, I'm Una from Midland Leg this year, walking virtually, and I've been involved with Student Cross for quite some time. I've got a short reflection on the Garden of Gethsemane and how I've reflected on that over the last week, and how, for me, it relates to listening. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. So, as I said, the Garden of Gethsemane is the part of the gospel that we heard on Palm Sunday, and I've been reflecting this week on how it relates to listening and to loneliness, and particularly how that relates in the current pandemic with what we've been going through. In the garden, Jesus asks his disciples to wait here and keep awake. And as we know, they failed 3 times. And on the last occasion, Jesus came back and said, "You can sleep now and take your rest." I've always found this story profoundly sad, that Jesus would ask his beloved friends to stay awake for him, but 3 times they let him down. This year, I found myself wondering and reflecting on why they didn't stay awake and why they couldn't stay awake. Why didn't they do what he asked them to do? He was, after all, he was the person they were the closest to. We talk about our old lives and the old normal and the new normal. Well, they chose to give up their old normal lives to follow him. And so surely for somebody that you gave up your life for, or your lifestyle for anyway, you would do everything possible to be there, for your best friend. You would, wouldn't you? So for somebody you deeply love, you would do whatever you could. So why didn't, when they were tired and he said, "Stay awake and pray with me," why didn't they just stand up, if they knew they were going to fall asleep? Or why didn't they get up and walk around and pray standing and walking? Just kind of puzzled me. And because that's what I think I would do. Probably wouldn't, but I would like to think I would try for my friends if I really got it, which kind of is where I went with my reflection with. If you would do anything for somebody that you really love, and most of us would, why didn't they do that? And it made me wonder about our ability as human beings to be able to say things really clearly to others, and or for others to hear clearly, which is what brought me on to reflecting on how being heard links in with loneliness. In terms of the disciples and listening, I wonder if they were able to hear Jesus, or whether they were actually only half listening when he asked. Maybe that's why they didn't do what he asked them to do. Maybe they were too caught up in their own thinking and their own thoughts to hear it. Maybe their minds were already busy, they were whirring. If your brain's anything like mine, it's whirring most of the time. And maybe they were whirring with thoughts about what had happened at the Last Supper. What did Jesus really mean? Who was going to betray him? Why had he washed their feet? There's so much there that their brains could have just been going at top speed, to the point where they didn't really hear him when he asked them to stay awake. Or maybe they were just too busy thinking and worrying even, or wondering about their future. Things were clearly starting to change, and maybe they were wondering about how it was going to affect me. If this all goes wrong, how is this going to affect my future? How is it going to affect my family? Maybe there's fear in there too. So that actually prevented them from actually listening and hearing what Jesus was asking them to do. On another hand, maybe it's something quite different. Maybe Jesus's request to us sounds really clear, but we know the end of the story. We've got the luxury of sitting at this point in history with the full story having been played out, and we have the benefit of understanding the context of his request. We know what was coming next, as did Jesus, but the disciples did not. Maybe they didn't understand the full horror of what was coming, and so why this mattered to Jesus. So if we have no experience of something which somebody else is saying to us, I guess my question for myself really is, how much do we really get it? Do we understand it, or do we need to have some sort of experience to easily understand it? Or is it easier if it's difficult, or we have no experience, to just blank it out and pretend it isn't there? So those are two thoughts I had on maybe why they couldn't. So maybe their heads were too busy thinking or worrying, and maybe they just didn't get the context, and we're looking at it with the benefit of hindsight. But then, to be fair to the disciples, on the other hand, maybe I also wondered actually how Jesus articulated his request to them. Other than the words that we read, did he say anything else to them? Did he tell them of his needs in a way of what he was going through and how much it mattered to him? Did he just ask them in a normal voice? Or did he stress how important it was? Did he feel it was necessary to make a big deal out of this? Or did he just say it in a way which, in all honesty, was a bit too opaque for them? They just didn't really understand what he was saying. We've heard much about the word loneliness since the beginning of the pandemic, and there's been a big focus on those living alone and those who can't get out, quite rightly so. However, we know that loneliness is not just about being or not being with other people. We know that you can feel loneliest in a crowd. So it's about not being heard or listened to. And I wonder how Jesus felt when he wasn't heard. I think from conversations I've had with friends and from my experience, we tend to be quite okay or even good at listening to people, really hearing them when they have relatable pain. It's something that we can relate to. So even big life events like maybe a cancer diagnosis or a relationship breakup, we can relate to that and we can support those people and really listen to them so that they feel heard. I wonder in this situation, it's more difficult to relate and to listen when it's something we can't relate to, when it's a different pain. So maybe it's even something as simple as a situation that the other person is finding stressful that we wouldn't find stressful. So we don't relate to it and we switch off, or even we might even judge. Maybe it just stops us listening and hearing. Or maybe before the pandemic, people had no real feeling of what it was like to be isolated. Maybe we can relate better to this now. There's something extremely powerful about being really heard, really listened to, and really accepted. Really hearing somebody is a tremendous gift to give. It's not easy, but it is more valuable than gold or whatever is your favourite thing. Beer, lard, northern. So from this, loneliness subsides. When you're really heard, loneliness ebbs away and is replaced by a feeling of validation and acceptance. So just to summarise then, possibly as with the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, when we have no knowledge or experience of somebody else's situation, when we're being told their story which we can't relate to, maybe I take this as a challenge for myself. Maybe that's a challenge for all of us, to really be present, really listen, and to respond to somebody's request, like Jesus is to his best friends, to his disciples at his hour of need, when he needed them and they couldn't or wouldn't hear. So maybe with the loneliness, and which has been chronic in our country for years, which is coming to the fore, maybe that's something that we can change in our own little ways, and maybe that's some good that might come out of the pandemic, who knows. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. Amen.